The secret ingredient to counseling is the relational aspect between the counselor and the counselee. If the counselee does not trust me, if I am their counselor and they don't trust me, it does not matter what method I use. It does not matter what techniques I have. It doesn't matter what good wisdom I give or I don't give. All that doesn't matter because that person does not trust me to give them good counsel. And so that is huge. I tell my students all the time, the glue that makes counseling work is not your techniques. The glue that makes the counseling work is not your model. The glue that makes counseling work is the trust of the counselee to the counselor and helping them work through and process their presenting problem.
Welcome to The Renewed Mind, the podcast where we explore the world of biblical counseling and bridge the gap to a more holistic understanding of how scripture, psychology, and counseling intersect. The Renewed Mind is here to provide insightful discussions, interviews, and transformative ideas that align with the wisdom of scripture. And now your host of the Renewed Mind podcast, Dr. Luther Smith.
Hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are and whatever you are doing. This is the Renewed Mind podcast. I am your host. My name is Dr. Luther Smith, and I hope that you are having a fantastic week this week as it is Wednesday, another hump day, another Renewed Mind episode. Actually, this week is kind of unique. Of course, for those of us who live here within the States, we are celebrating July 4th, Independence Day, which is very, very important for us as the origin and the birth of a nation, which is fantastic for us. For those of you guys who live abroad, this is what we do every year to celebrate our independence, to operate as a sovereign nation. And that's an awesome thing. Every year I kind of look forward to this. This is a wonderful time. As a matter of fact, the place where I live, or the state where I live, really, we don't need licenses to get fireworks. We can just buy them. Matter of fact, we can buy them year round here if we wanted to, but it's during the time this year where everybody sets up their tents and sells all types of fireworks and streamers and blasters. And I mean it is nuts for the first 2 weeks, but it is so cool to see all the displays. As a matter of fact, it was one time where there was a house that we went to that we just kind of blasted them off in the backyard. The house across from us down the block, I mean, they had a light show like you would not believe. It looked professional grade. It was amazing. In someone's backyard, I mean, they were firing off all these types of fireworks. So it's an amazing time here as well. So, and it's also a short week. As individuals who are working or have the opportunity to take the time off and enjoy friends and family. So that's an awesome thing. So if you haven't that time to do that, then do that as well. For those of you guys who are new to the podcast, we're getting a lot of new viewers, which is really kind of cool. So for those of you guys who have been rocking with me since the beginning, Maddie, Madeline, and I days, welcome. Thank you again for tuning in. And I hope that we would continue to give you content that you can use. For those of you guys who are new, though, let me tell you a little bit about what the Renewed Mind podcast is all about. This podcast is designed to look at counseling, the practice of counseling, and the discipline of psychology from a biblical lens. And so we believe that God has communicated through human authors to pen his mind on paper concerning life itself, how we are to view life, how we are to perceive it, and our interactions with human beings. So God's word indeed impacts everything, and that includes every subject. And so what we try to do here at the Renewed Mind podcast is look at the discipline of psychology, which we define as the observation or the study of the whole being, and the practice of counseling, which, by the way, is underscored by how we ought to conduct ourselves with everyone, really, and seek to try to understand how we do counseling and psychology from a biblical perspective. So we look at all sorts of topics here. If you go to our Rumble page or our YouTube page, you'll find that we have a whole bunch of topics ranging from the Holy Spirit and counseling biblically to anxiety and counseling biblically to depression and counseling biblically. I mean, we have all sorts of topics that we cover here and that we will continue to cover here on the Renewed Mind as well. So for those of you guys who are tuning in for the first time, welcome. And I hope that you stick around and that you enjoy the content and that at least I'm engaging enough for you to stay and keep tuning in. So that's a good thing. Well, let me talk about what we discussed last week on the Renewed Mind. Last week, we had discussed the topic of research. Actually, this was a two-parter. So part one was looking essentially at the biblical basis for research, why research is important for us to observe creation, right? And then part two, we looked at the individual known as Francis Bacon, who was the developer of what he called the method of induction of knowledge, or the method of induction of science, or what we would refer to as the scientific method. He was the creator and the developer of that particular method. And we looked at some of the points that he was making that way back when, before this method was developed, the way that they would observe creation was actually pretty subpar. And he had four criticisms that he levied against individuals who would do research to gain and attain knowledge about reality in the world around them. And so Francis Bacon, being a believer, by the way, analyzed how people would do research and ascertain knowledge and concluded that most of it was all speculation and superstition. And that instead of one having a preconceived idea and trying to find that preconceived idea within creation itself, instead, he said, you should observe creation and allow creation to give you information about itself based upon what you observe. So it is an inductive approach rather than a deductive approach. And so from that point on, he developed his methodology to basically underscore two things. That one, that creation itself gives information about the divine attributes of God. That nature informs us of a creator, and nature informs us of the attributes that this creator possesses, and that we ought to observe creation from that vantage point. And the second vantage point that he mentioned is that the assertion of knowledge, true knowledge, from the observation of creation ought to serve humanity. And so he kind of posited that there are many people that pursue knowledge for many things, but the greatest pursuit of knowledge is that it serves the individual. And so, again, we tied it back into 1 Thessalonians 5, that the whole goal of counseling and really using research in light of counseling is to basically exemplify how God has created reality, to underscore that, to emphasize that, to highlight that, and also to use that information that is observed in the observation of the world around us, and that includes us too, and how we interact with each other and things like that, to be used to benefit the individual who might have a presenting problem in a particular area or focus. So that was last episode. I really, really enjoyed that. I'm thinking about maybe doing a part 3 because I've got some other things I'd like to explore in this particular area. So I have not yet put that all together, but if I do, then we will do a part 3 to that as well. But okay, well, let's go ahead and grease the skids and talk about what I want to talk about in this episode of the Renewed Mind. So one of the things that we try and attempt to do here at the Renewed Mind is we not only look at things of the past, but we try to assess, again, the biblical worldview as it pertains to everything. And one of the things that is beneficial during the time that we live in is technology gives us a lot of opportunity to engage in various ideas. We see this in scripture, by the way. The Apostle Paul engaged in various ideas within the culture as well, basically concerning who God is and things like that. But he was very, very aware of the different cultures and what they were teaching at the time. And so we try to engage in that as well. And one of the things that I like to do is not only critique books and things like that, but I also like to critique videos. Not necessarily to destroy destroy or break down an individual, but to acknowledge what aligns with the biblical perspective and also to highlight the things that are inconsistent with a biblical perspective. I think that is important for critical thinking, particularly in this area as we explore psychology and counseling. Well, one such individual goes by the name of Dr. K. Dr. K is a huge individual on YouTube. As a matter of fact, he has a YouTube channel known as Healthy Gamer GG. That is his channel. And he first started off talking about practices of healthy gaming, how to keep your mental health in a healthy state while engaging in gaming and doing all those things. Well, his podcast or his YouTube channel really just exploded, and he's just shy of about 3 million subscribers, which is pretty amazing. And hats off to him. He does great work, good quality videos and things like that. He's been a psychiatrist for about 20 years, and he's been working within the field of counseling and diagnosing and all of that stuff. And he's also on TikTok as well and has a pretty good following there. He does YouTube Reels and has quite a following there and just picks all topics that are essentially mental health related. And one of the videos that I want to watch and kind of react to is one called Why Therapy Sucks for Men. I think some of the things that he mentions within his video is somewhat important. And so I want to run through this and watch this and react to it and respond to it, basically pointing out the things that I think that the biblical perspective aligns with, but also to add a couple of more nuanced details to his video because he's just kind of giving his take kind of in real time. So you have to forgive me. I do not have YouTube Premium. You know, I'm a cheapskate. This is a small channel, and so we don't have YouTube Premium. We're not rocking that much. Well, maybe if we get a little bigger and I could find some support, maybe we'll go there. So there are going to be some cuts in this particular episode here. I will try my best to take out the commercials as they pop up randomly. I just want to let you know that he also has kind of a little advertisement within this video himself too, which I will also skip over, and I will put a link down in the description below if you want to check out the video as well and kind of watch it with his advertisement personally on some of the things that he has. He has his own website where he has articles and products that you can buy and stuff like that to help increase your mental health and give you better focus. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this, and then I will make some comments on it along the way, and then we will.
Hey y'all, today we're going to talk about why therapy sucks for men. And that may sound kind of confusing because here I am a man, here I am a psychiatrist doing psychotherapy with men. So what on earth am I talking about? Why do I think therapy sucks for men? In my experience as a psychiatrist, I do actually believe that there are systemic biases that make it hard for men to engage in therapy. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what those systemic factors are, how we can understand them, and even how to overcome some of those factors and move towards more emotional health. So we have to start by understanding where this idea that talk therapy is the gold standard for treating mental illness comes from. So what we really need to understand is that the majority of patients in the history of psychotherapy have been women. About 60 to 70% of patients today who engage in psychotherapy are women. The other thing is that about 60 to 70% of therapists today are actually women. So I think what happened early on in psychiatry or psychotherapy is that the majority of people we were helping were women. And so when me as a doctor, when I look at 10 of my patients and I see, okay, so it looks like talking to people about their feelings on average is the most successful thing that I can do. But
let me just jump in right quick and add a little bit of context to essentially what he's saying here. Now, talk therapy, he's right that talk therapy is the gold standard concerning counseling as it is popularly presented. And so his major point here is that a large majority of individuals who go to counseling are women, and a large majority of the counselors within counseling itself who engage with counselees are women, which is true. Most individuals who go into this field are mostly women. And so the impact of having a large majority of people in this particular profession that are the opposite sex ends up kind of skewing talk therapy in this direction, because most women, what do when they have issues and problems? They usually talk it out with another person. That's kind of what he's getting at, that there's a bias that's skewed mostly towards women because most women are involved in most of the counseling. However, I would like to submit to you and to add a little bit of perspective to why talk therapy is so important. Necessarily believe that it's only just because women are involved in counseling, but I do believe that there are past models that have influenced the fact that talk therapy has now been the gold standard. Let me run a little bit of counseling history for you and then give you the reason as to why I come up with this conclusion that I've come up with. So, counseling may be predominantly seen and observed by women and practiced by women, but the theories themselves have not been, for the most part, impacted by women up until just recently. Modern counseling, as it is popularly presented, began with Sigmund Freud and his psychoanalytic theory. Now, I would submit to you that counseling and psychology as a discipline started way before Sigmund Freud, and we'll talk about that in a future video later on down the line. But nevertheless, we find that Sigmund Freud, usually if you take a psychology course or any type of beginning psychology course, they usually begin that Sigmund Freud laid down the foundation for counseling and modern psychology as it is today. Then we look at Carl Jung. He was actually trained under Sigmund Freud, and he developed what was known as personality theory. Now, Sigmund Freud had some thoughts and ideas about personality as well, but Carl Jung kind of took some of the ideas of Sigmund Freud and refined them, fine-tuned them, added his own kind of thoughts and belief systems about what the personality was. And so, and then kind of ran off with that. Then we have Alfred Adler and Adlerian therapy. When we think of Adlerian therapy, kind of think of parent training groups and family systems and things like that. Alfred Adler was more of a guy who promoted essentially family care, prenatal care. He was actually related to Sigmund Freud. Kind of went off on his own theories and things like that. So Alfred Adler was very influential in terms of how counseling is presented as well. It was radically different from what Freud was doing in his psychoanalytic theory. Then we get to Viktor Frankl and Rollo May. This was mid 1900s. He's a little bit after World War II. And this is kind of important too, because when everybody came back from the war, people were asking a lot of big questions because of all of the destruction and all of the people that had died due to the war that took place. And, people were kind of asking questions, what the meaning of life is. Why are we here? What is the purpose of existence, of living here? And so Viktor Frankl and Rollo May, who did not know each other, but they were highly influential in the development of this theoretical model for counseling, that now counseling was becoming more philosophical, the individual asking questions about who they are and why they exist and all of these things, and walking with a counselee through those things and asking those deep questions and trying to come up with an answer for the meaning of life and how they ought to live to give them purpose and things like that. So that was another theoretical model that influenced counseling as we know it today. Then we have Fritz and Laura Perls. Fritz and Laura Perls were the developer of the Gestalt therapeutic model. And theirs was really different in that they believed in what was known as holism. So one's thinking impacts one's physiology. And so connecting one's perspective and one's outlook and how one feels inside of them, becoming in tune with not only who they are, but their physical sensations. And so that was really a shift in the direction of counseling, again, with this model that Fritz and Laura Perls came up with. Fritz was actually the guy who actually developed it, and his wife Laura was the one that kind of organized his notes and made things clear in terms of the theoretical model Then we have Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers, again, very influential. His claim to fame was he developed what was known as the person-centered model for counseling. So before Carl Rogers, everybody kind of thought that the counselor was the expert, that a person would come in, the counselor would assess them, and then would work to solve their issues. In Carl Rogers' model, the counselor is responsible for creating the environment for the counselee to have self-insight. That Carl Rogers believed that because human beings are reasonable, they're rational creatures, they have all the tools necessary to solve their own issues and their problems. They just need the environment to do so. And so, with the use of congruency, unconditional positive regard, reflecting back what a person says, that person will be able to self-explore and gather insight into their own issue and solve their own issue, again, which was radically different from, the previous theoretical models. Then we have Albert Ellis. Albert Ellis, who was inspired by B.F. Skinner, who came up with behavioral therapy. Now, what's interesting about this particular model is all the other models are either looking for insight into themselves or finding the meaning and purpose for life or connecting with their bodily responses or setting or creating the environment so that the person can kind of explore themselves. Albert Ellis comes straight out of the gate and goes, you know what? That's great for them, but we're actually going to focus on overt behaviors. I can't observe a thought with my eyes, but I can observe a behavior. So, for example, if a person is having a problem with anger, maybe they road rage or whatever the case is, well, we can examine that, we can study that, we can look at that. And so Albert Ellis takes more of a scientific approach to counseling, which I find very fascinating because behavioral therapy is influenced heavily by the scientific method, which we talked about in the last episodes. Then we have CBT, which again is kind of a derivative of behavioral therapy, but adds what one thinks. So what one thinks determines how one behaves or conducts themselves. Then we have William Glasser. William Glasser was the developer of what became known as reality therapy. And it's essentially is what you're doing getting you what you want out of life? Is what you're doing getting you what you want? If you change your habits or change the way that you live or change the things that you do, if that gets you what you want, then you want to keep doing that. If you are doing something and it's not getting you what you want to avoid that. So that's kind of the idea, reality therapy. And then, of course, we have feminist theoretical models, in which case those came very late in the game. And feminist therapy looks at all of these models and says, wait, hold on, these models were all created by men. So psychoanalytic was created by men, reality therapy was created by men, all of these things were created by men. And so we want a seat at the table because as women, we go through unique challenges that men don't. And so over the course of time, those who were feminists created their own theoretical models specifically designed to address women's issues and things like that. So really, in reality, talk therapy, I would say that it's not just the fact that women were involved in, because there's a large majority of women counselees, there's a large majority of women counselors, therefore talk therapy is the gold standard. No, I would submit to you that in addition to that, talk therapy is a blending of about several models all together. One of the models is psychoanalytic, where the person comes in and talks and speaks, and the counselor kind of writes down notes and kind of thinks about it. I think that's kind of the foundation. And then you have person-centered, where the counselor creates the environment that's necessary for the counselor to have, or the counselee to have, self-insight. And I would even say there's a tad or a sprinkle of feminist theory in there as well. So I believe that's why talk therapy is kind of the gold standard, not because there are just women that work within the practice and there are women that come to counseling, but because I believe that there are certain models that have impacted the way that counselors approach counselees and how to deal with presenting problems, specifically those three. Okay, let's go ahead and continue here.
Even though that's factually correct, I may not be taking into account that 7 out of those 10 people are women. And maybe the people who are getting helped the most with talk therapy or talking about their emotions are actually women. And it's not just me that says this. If you actually look at the American Psychological Association's guidance for working with boys and men, they sort of point out a systemic bias in the way that we diagnose men and women. And that's a lot of the diagnoses that women get, like depression and anxiety, which, by the way, women are about 2 to 3 times as likely to be diagnosed with that stuff. A lot of those diagnoses have to do with feelings and being able to articulate stuff. So, for example, major depressive disorder involves feeling sad when you're depressed, right? Makes sense.
Okay, let me pause here and talk a little bit about major depressive disorder just briefly. Now, he does mention that major depressive disorder has within it the characteristic and quality of feeling sad, but that's not what major depressive disorder is. So, for those of you guys who are not familiar with major depressive disorder, let me just flesh it out just a little bit. I want to share a tab with you on the DSM-5 definition of mental disorder, and then I want to talk about some of the important details that are found within this particular explanation of what mental disorders are. Let's go ahead and read this. Again, this is the DSM-5 definition of mental disorder. It says this: a mental disorder is a syndrome characterized by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or development processes underlying mental functioning. Mental disorders are usually associated with significant distress or disability in social, occupational, or other important activities. An expectable or culturally approved response to a common stressor or loss, such as the death of a loved one, is not a mental disorder. Socially deviant behavior, for example, political, religious, or sexual, and conflicts that are primarily between the individual and society are not mental disorders unless the deviance or conflict results from a dysfunction in the individual as described above. So, let me break down some of these important parts here concerning this particular explanation of what a mental disorder is from the DSM-5. First of all, a mental disorder, according to the DSM-5, is a syndrome that is characterized by clinically significant disturbance in a person's thought, how they regulate their emotions, their behavior that reflects a significant disturbance in their thinking, their biology, or even their human growth and development. For example, individuals who are autistic, that is severely autistic, are categorized as having a mental disorder, not because just of who they are, but because their developmental processes and how they think has been disturbed to the point where it causes dysfunction and disruption in that individual. So when we say that a person has a disorder, what we mean is that that person experiences a significant distress or disturbance in terms of their thinking, their emotion, or their behavior that impacts either their psychology, their biology, or even their development. In addition, mental disorders, according to the DSM-5, usually are associated with distress or impairment in relationships, work, or other activities. So, for example, if you can't keep a job, and it's not because you got laid off or or things like that, but you can't keep a job because of the fact that you have this extreme disturbance or dysfunction, such as a person who may experience a phobia like the fear of the marketplace. They can't go outside without the extreme fear of being either taken advantage of or something like that. That's going to impact their employment. Because they had this overwhelming sense of anxiousness has gotten them to the point where it affects their psychology, it affects the way that they perceive things. And so that would be a challenge. If a person is anxious about a test or something like that, that's not considered a disorder. But a person who is overwhelmed in a sense that they can't function, they can't create relationships, they can't keep a job, or it impacts their daily life and their important activities, then that would be considered possibly in the running for a mental disorder. Of course, culture is something that one would have to consider, because maybe something that is culturally inappropriate for us is not culturally inappropriate in another place. And so that has to be, considered as well. For example, individuals who pray to God, that person isn't seeing things that aren't there, or talking to a person that isn't there. It's not like they have a disturbance. So that would not be considered a mental disorder. A person going through bereavement or tragedy or the loss of a loved one that's not in the category of a mental disorder. Again, even social deviant behavior, according to the DSM-5, is not categorized as a mental disorder unless the deviant behavior results from the dysfunction of the person. For example, like bipolar, those who are bipolar engage in promiscuity in some respects. So that might be a challenge. It's not the fact that they are engaging in promiscuity because they desire to do that, or that they're intending to do that. It is the fact that the disorder itself is impacting their perception and the way they respond to things. As a matter of fact, if you want to have a really good grasp of this, go back to the previous episode where I interviewed a woman by the name of Katie Dale. Katie Dale has bipolar disorder. She takes medication for it, but at the same time, when she was going through this particular experience without having medication and trying to work through some things, that was some of the challenges that she had as well. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to that if you have not done so. So when it comes to mental disorders, particularly major depressive disorder, it's not that just feeling sad or blue is the thing that constitutes a mental disorder. Usually when a person is diagnosed with a mental disorder, there's a certain set of symptoms, and there's a minimum amount of symptoms that you need to meet in order to fulfill that criteria. And there's also the duration of time that a person needs to have that minimum set of criteria, and it needs to be expressed over a certain period of time. So if a person is experiencing the criteria for MDD or major depressive disorder, but the threshold of time has not been met, well, they don't qualify to receive that particular disorder or that particular diagnosis or whatever. At the same time, if the time is met, but they don't have the symptoms, the minimum amount of symptoms to meet that criteria, then they might be diagnosed or assessed with depressive disorder not otherwise specified, or NOS, or something to that degree, because they don't meet the criteria for that disorder, although they meet the criteria for the time. So it is true that there is a sadness or blue to it, but it is not exactly just that. There's more going on than just feeling sad or blue. All right, let's go ahead and continue here.
That a lot of men are actually diagnosed with what we call externalizing disorders, things like addictions or sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder. So these are disorders that involve behaviors. So I think they're sort of cluing us in on a really important idea, which is that when men feel something, they act on it as opposed to articulate it or talk about it. And if we tunnel down into a little bit,
I just wanted to add, this is a really good point that he's making concerning men and women generally speaking, that women usually talk out feelings while men usually kind of express it by way of action and activity. One of the things that we find, particularly within diagnoses, and this is just kind of an aside, could it be one of the troubles that we have of, shall we say, diagnoses bias is, I think a lot of times people are not following what is known as the method of diagnoses. There is a certain method to diagnosing individuals. Remember how I said that when you diagnose a person, or when a person is assessed for a particular disorder, there are two particular things that they need to meet. One of them is they need to have a minimum amount of symptoms that are associated with the disorder that the individual is experiencing. And that could be done by all sorts of ways. There's assessments and tests and things like that that a counselor can run to see whether or not that person meets the symptomology and the criteria for that particular disorder. And of course, there's the time duration too. How long or how often have these symptoms been in the life of the life of the individual? But a lot of times, a lot of practitioners don't really do that. They don't really use the method to assess and diagnose individuals. And so a lot of individuals end up getting misdiagnosed, or there's a lot of assumptions about the person who might be expressing the symptoms, or even symptoms may be overlooked. For example, depression may look very different from a guy than with a girl. And so these things ought to be considered, but they ought to be considered within the confines of the method of diagnosis itself. And so I find this to be a challenge that even individuals, some practitioners, do not use the method of diagnoses to actually assess individuals. I heard some stat that the average that a person has to be misdiagnosed 7 times before they get the correct diagnoses. Well, why are they misdiagnosed 7 times? Well, it's because those 7 people that diagnosed or assessed that individual didn't use the method. That's why. And of course, there's a lot of overlap between diagnoses as well. But I just wanted to add that too as well, that possibly could play a factor or a role in why this discrepancy between men and women is because the method that's being used that would actually assess individuals is not being used for the most part. All right, let's go ahead and continue.
About how men deal with their emotions, we'll kind of see that this is true in general as well. Because if you're a man, an emotion is a problem to be solved, not something to be talked about, right? So think about like if you get bullied on the playground and you feel ashamed of yourself and people call you a fat kid and beat you up, that isn't something you talk about. In fact, if you go and cry to mommy or cry to the teacher, you're actually treated worse. You're taught that articulating problems and talking to people is cause for punishment. Instead, what you're supposed to do if you're a man is fix the problem, right? So if
I want to add something to this too as well. And it could be too the reason why this discrepancy between female counselees and male counselees exists is because, again, we've kind of set it up this way, and he's actually going to say something that's kind of poignant later on down the line. But asking how one feels versus how one thinks is important. For example, if I have a counselee and I'm talking with them, particularly a couple or something like that, and I ask the guy how he feels, he may not know because he doesn't have the words to express that, because that's not something that he's had to think about. As a matter of fact, I would submit to you that for the most part here, the culture basically desires that men be rational creatures. Now, I'm not saying that women are not rational creatures, but we kind of have this dynamic. Right? Women are more emotional, men are more rational. Now that's kind of a misnomer, because I've actually seen men that are way more emotional than women are. And I think this is due to the misunderstanding of what emotions are and who carries them predominantly. I believe that the biblical perspective is that we are human beings created in God's image, and that God has given both male and female the ability to express emotion and the ability to think critically and be rational. And I think that this dynamic, this, girls feel more than guys do, I believe comes from, again, society itself and how we presupposed men and women operate. And so usually in counseling, when I have a couple and I'm talking with them, particularly in biblical counseling or counseling from a biblical worldview, I'll usually turn to the guy, and instead of asking him how he feels, I'll ask him what he thinks. Tell me what you think about this versus tell me how you feel about this. And then use that as a springboard to usually talk about emotions and things like that. One of the things too that we also have within our culture as well that is a problem is the fact that for men, feelings are bad or they're negative. or they get in the way. But that's not true. In counseling from the biblical perspective, emotions have a place. We just have to learn how to wield them properly. And we do so with good skill sets and good information. So I would say that the reason why men don't know how to articulate is because it's never been taught or instructed to them how to do that. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and continue.
Kids make fun of me for being fat. I'm supposed to lose weight, get ripped, learn martial arts, and the next time they talk, I'm going to teach them who's boss. And so if you sort of think about it, the solution to an internal feeling ashamed, is to take an action and change the circumstances that make me feel that way. If I'm feeling ashamed because I don't have a job and I don't have...
By the way, just to add just again another point here is that there are other models that talk about this. If a guy was going to counseling and he wanted something to do, there is a model for this. And the model is called behavioral therapy. If the guy's looking like, look, I have a problem with anger, just tell me what to do to stop this. There are models out there that are predominantly overt behavioral focused that could possibly assist a guy if that's what they wanted. So it's not that there's not a technique out there that doesn't exist or a model out there that doesn't exist that addresses this. It's just that, we don't use it because, again, we're using something different. But there is a model out there for that. And again, all models have positive and negative aspects to them. Okay, let's go ahead and continue.
Have any money. What should I do about that? Should I go cry to mommy about how I don't have a job or don't have money? Should I cry to my girlfriend about how I'm broke all the time? No, if you're a man, you need to man the fuck, go out there, get a job, and start making money. If you're feeling bad in here, as a man, what we're taught is you're supposed to go fix the problem out there. And this also manifests in men's reluctance to engage in couples counseling. So oftentimes, if you're in a relationship, and I'm assuming a heteronormative relationship for a second, and your wife or your girlfriend says, hey, I think we need to go see a counselor, oftentimes men will be reluctant to engage in that. And if you actually look at the research for why men are reluctant, what you discover is it's not that they're trying to put their head in the sand or they're avoiding a problem or anything like that. They actually feel outgunned in therapy. They feel like when they go to a couples counselor, my partner is so much better at understanding and articulating their feelings that they can sort of make their case better than I can.
That is somewhat true. Although I would like to add again another nuance to this. Again, in couples counseling, there might be some limitations that are going on within couples counseling that may be running kind of in the background. The first thing is that the guy, again, has never been taught or instructed how to express themselves in a way that is meaningful in terms of how they feel and things like that. Sometimes women don't know how to articulate themselves, but we may assume that they do because they're women, which again, that would have to be something that we would have to work on as counselors working from a biblical position, not to necessarily give women the benefit of the doubt, just that they are open to their feelings just because they're women. Some women have a very difficult time expressing themselves or using the words to express themselves. Another thing too is that men may assume that they're being outgunned in counseling as well. So they might perceive that, wow, counseling, mostly counseling is for women. I don't really need this. All I just need to do is pull myself up on my bootstraps and just knuckle down harder. That's kind of the idea too, is that men may have a predisposition to counseling as well, that, this is woman's work. This ain't me. I'm good. And so these three limitations may impact counseling just in general for guys, but also couples counseling as well. So I think that there's kind of a dual thing going on here, that one, the culture itself does kind of emphasize this, I believe, a little too much and doesn't give a little nuance to the situation. But I think also too, we have to also consider too that there's the guy may feel outgunned because he might have an assumption about counseling, or that he might have a particular fear about counseling that may or may not be true, depending on where he's coming from. So, okay, let's continue.
And when the therapist tries talking to me, I just say, I don't know a lot, or I'm not sure. I don't know someone's asking me to play basketball, but I don't know how to dribble. And so what men actually feel like in couples counseling is that they don't know how to effectively communicate. So imagine a situation where you're like going into a court of law and there's a judge there and your wife makes her case, right? She says, hey, Alok is neglectful. He doesn't appreciate me. I do so much for him. And I know he works hard, but he's really short with me sometimes and it really hurts and I feel really underappreciated. And then as a man, how do I respond to this? I don't speak the language of emotions. Judge એવું નથી તમને સમજણ નથી પડતી. આ બેન દારૂ બહુ પીએ છે પછી મને લાફો મારે. આ દારૂ બહુ પીએ છે પણ પછી એ મને લાફો મારે તો મારાથી એને લાફો ન મરાય યાર. પછી હું શું કરું? And so as a dude, you're like,
I don't know what he just said. I don't know what he just said, but I think he's making the point here. He's making the point that women and men speak differently, that he doesn't know how to speak the language of emotion, so he's going to communicate the way that makes him comfortable. Again, I underscore, the biblical perspective that men and women are both rational and emotional, depending on the context, that we are made in God's image, and that God has developed us with the skill and the function of reason and logic and critical thinking, and that he has built within us emotion and feeling and all of that. And so I think that working from a biblical perspective, having men and women both understand that emotions are neither good nor bad, they just are. And that learning how to use and be in tune with where you are and how you feel is a skill that you learn. Now, I often too define emotions a little bit differently than how he's defining them right now. I'll get into that later, but the point is that starting off with underscoring and highlighting that emotions from a biblical perspective are neither good or bad. You have emotions because you're a human being. You have emotions because you are created in God's image. You have emotions to learn how to connect and see where you are at any given moment. And if you learn how to use that and wield that with good information and good skills, you'll be able to communicate without feeling that there is a deficiency there. Let's go ahead and continue here.
like, you don't know how to communicate in the way that therapists like. So men literally feel outgunned to engage in things like couples therapy. And that's because we as men communicate our emotions in a different way. So my favorite example of how men communicate differently is the negative expression of a positive affection. So when we like someone and we're proud of one of our homies or our bros, we don't say that to them, right? In fact, what we do is we kind of dog them about it. If my friend has been single for a while after a bad breakup and starts dating someone else, and I feel really proud and good about that, I don't say, hey, friend, I'm really proud of you. And I'm proud that you've been able to find someone who sees the lovable qualities within you that I see. I'm proud that you found someone who treats you the way that I think you deserve to be treated, who loves you for who you are in the way that I love you for who you are. In the history of humanity, I do not think that sequence of words has ever been spoken by a single man. That's not what we say. What do? We say, bruh, GG, noob, you're whipped. I guess we'll never see you again. And we're smiling the whole time. We're not like, why don't you text me anymore? I know you haven't been texting me. I feel hurt. Instead of
So this is a good point too as well. The first example that he gave, hey, I just want to say I'm really proud of you that you found a woman that actually respects you the way that I respect you. And then he mentioned that, no one in the history of the world has ever said that. I would actually disagree with that. Anecdotally, but also too, generally speaking. See, that I think that's one of the challenges that we have within the culture itself, is that there's nothing wrong with using those sequence of words that, men don't ever say that. Well, generally speaking, yeah, right. Men don't usually phrase those words together, but why? Maybe it's because they weren't taught to. Now, there's nothing wrong with the razzing too. We'll razz as well. As a matter of fact, usually what we'll do is we'll razz and then we'll say something to the effect of, man, but I'm real happy for you, bro. I really think that I really hope that it works out between you and this person that you're with. Well done, or something like that. We mean the same thing, even though we're not expressing it in that manner. But if a person comes up and says to you, Hey, bro, I just wanted to say, man, I'm really, really proud of you, man. And I think that she really respects you, the way that I respect you. And I really, really appreciate how she treats you. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I think part of being in counseling is to instruct and guide and advise people that it's really all about the context. If your boys are razzing you, if you're razzing your boys, of course you're kind of expressing that you have a love and affection for the individuals that are around you. So you're giving them a whole bunch of this rigmarole. But at the same time, when it's you and your boy, and you're having having one of those moments, and you turn to him and say, you've been through a lot of bad relationships, man. You've been down bad, bro. You've been down bad. But at the same time, man, I see that, she loves you, she cares for you, she respects you, man. And I just want you to know that that's what I've been thinking about. That's what I've been hoping has been happening. That's what I've been praying for you for. And man, I'm really grateful, man, that you finally found somebody that really, really respects you as a man. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. And I believe guiding and advising men to kind of share in that space and in that context, I think is perfect, is good. But he's right. We don't generally speak that way, just usually. Right. But I think that this is something that has to be instructed. And so that's a challenge. All right, let's continue.
We do is we actually dog on this guy, right? We're like, we call him whipped and we call him a wuss and we call him, like, we say all these negative things, right? Like, oh, where's the apron strings? We'll say all this like misogynistic crap, but the whole time we're like expressing appreciation and smiling at him. So men have this negative expression of a positive affection. When we feel good about something, we can't just say that, right? Because that's not what we were taught.
Did you catch that? Did you catch what he said? Did you catch what he said? Let me rewind it back again. Let me rewind it back, and then we'll play it again here.
So men have this negative expression of a positive affection. When we feel good about something, we can't just say that, right? Because that's not what we were taught. Instead, what we have to do is we have to insult the person that we're proud of.
Did you hear it? He said, we don't talk that way because that's not what we were taught. This is a very important point to make, that the way that one speaks is not genetic. We're not predisposed to speak and razz our buddies. We are taught to razz our buddies, to express affection for them. So could it be possible that razzing is one of many things that we can do to express our emotions to another person? This is one of the reasons why I said what I said a few minutes ago, was that to expand one's outlook of how they look at emotions is extremely important. That you can express how you feel and what you think in various contexts, and to change the way that you emote, so to speak, is not a bad thing. But to also to address that emotions is not just a female trait, but that it is a human trait. And to learn how to control your emotional state with good skill and information can be helpful for you in various contexts. I wanted to rewind that point, because that point underscores the fact that, one is not predisposed or genetically predisposed to communicate a certain way. Communication is a skill that one ought to learn, right? And when one has good information and a good skill set, they're able to communicate effectively. When they don't, it doesn't work. And that includes for women too. Let's continue.
That's not how psychotherapy works, right? So if this is my mode of communication, I go see my therapist and my therapist is proud of me. They don't say, hey, fuck, you got a job. You suck. I guess you're not going to be coming to therapy anymore because you ain't got this time because you got all this work to do. Screw you. That's not what your therapist says. In fact, we're trained to say the opposite. So the way that we're trained to speak in therapy is, first of all, don't speak very much, right? Don't solve problems. Just sit there and listen. And
now I want to talk about his 3 points just right. I know I keep turning the thing off and on, but it's very, very important to bring up. I wasn't taught like that. I personally wasn't. Now I know that there's a lot of people who have, which is why he's bringing it up. But I was taught that you don't speak very much because you want to give the counselee a chance to respond. But that doesn't mean that you don't talk at all. The ratio should be 2 to 1. The counselee speaks twice as long as you do. But again, within biblical counseling, it depends on the context. If a person has not been taught how to express their emotions, well, then guess what? We need to instruct them and guide and advise them on how to do that. Now, that goes into number 2, don't solve problems. Again, there are models out there that don't agree with this. Behavioral therapy being one of them, cognitive behavioral therapy being one of them. And so, not solving problems, this is the reason why you're coming to counseling in the first place. You have a presenting problem that you want fixed, or you have something that you want to process through, or you have something that you want to work through. So, that is a problem for you. And to sit there and listen, that's a skill. That is a skill that all counselors ought to have and refine and work on and focus on, because to sit and listen is to listen to the counselee and their plight and their struggle and their angst. Not that we don't engage, which is, I think that's what he's talking about, is that counseling for the most part is a spectator sport. It's a spectator's activity. We're just kind of sitting and kind of listening and kind of passively taking in information and going, that's interesting. Well, how do you feel about that? And so that leaves the guy frustrated. But what I found, particularly within the biblical worldview in counseling from a biblical perspective, is that it is passive in some respects and active in other respects. So to sit and listen and to take in all of this information that the counselee is saying, so that that counselor has a clear composite of what the counselee is struggling with, and then using that information and addressing it with skills, information, things like that, is a more active approach after I've understood the problem from this person's perspective and seek to help them and address them. But in some respects, again, he's right. I'm not dissing him or dismissing him or anything else like that. But again, this is found in those 3 particular counseling perspectives that I described: psychoanalytic, person-centered, and feminist therapy to some degree. Those particular theoretical models are advocates of this, of these particular points that he's bringing up right now, right? Again, there are other therapeutic models that would agree, but they would add a couple of things to this, and then I mention those frequently here in this episode. But there are theoretical models that underscore this very, very much, and particularly those 3 that I mentioned and described. All right, let's continue.
Ask this person lots of questions that they're going to say, I don't know to. How do you feel about that? How does that make you feel? I don't know. Well, how does that make you feel? I don't know. And so then if you're a dude and you go to therapy, you feel like an idiot, right? Because they're asking you all these questions. You're supposed to know what you feel, but you don't know. And that's because of the way that we've been taught about our emotions. The last thing
Again, that's the way that we've been taught about our emotions. Teaching about communication. Communication is not genetic. Communication is a skill. And we are emotional because we are human beings that express that.
consider is that when it comes to emotional health, men are very physical with it. So even if I ask a dude, hey, like, it sounds like you got dumped. Tell me a little bit about how you feel. The dude may not be able to say, I feel unlovable. I'm full of fear that perhaps I won't be able to find a partner. I'm afraid that I'm fundamentally broken in some way that precludes me and maybe destines me to be alone for the rest of my life. That's not what dudes say. What dudes say is, it felt like she ripped my heart out. It felt like she stomped on my balls. And if you say that as a dude, the other dudes will know exactly what you mean, right? Like, we all know, like, oh man, like, oh, it's not just ripped your heart out, it's also a stomp on the balls. I felt that, man. The last time I got dumped, I found out my partner was cheating on me. Felt like she kicked me in the nuts, dude. I know exactly how you feel.
This is an interesting point here that the biblical worldview draws out. Let me kind of flesh this out for a minute. So he mentioned that when guys express themselves, they express themselves figuratively, using examples to describe how they feel. So, I got kicked in the teeth, or, I got kicked in the balls, or something like that. And of course, a man could relate to that because that would hurt. Or the person stabbed me in the back. That's kind of the idea here. Well, what I find fascinating is that the scriptures also use figurative language to express such sorrow. and such grief. And all of the Psalms are written by men. So let me give you an example of what I mean when it talks about figurative language here. Let's look at a psalm. This is Psalm 6. It is a short psalm, an interesting psalm here. Psalm 6, verses 1 to 10. I want you to look at and listen to the language of this particular psalm. Again, this is a psalm of David, who is a dude, who's a guy. Listen to the way that he talks or that he writes. He says, "O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger, nor chasten me in your wrath. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am pining away. Heal me, O Lord, for my bones are dismayed, and my soul is greatly dismayed. But you, O Lord, how long? Return, O Lord, rescue my soul. Save me because of your loving kindness. For there is no mention of you in death, in Sheol, or the grave. Who will give you thanks? I am weary with my sighing. Every night I make my bed swim. I dissolve my couch with tears. My eyes wasted away with grief, and it has become old because of all my adversaries. Depart from me, all who do iniquity, for the Lord has heard the voice of my weeping. The Lord has heard my supplication. The Lord receives my prayer. All enemies will be ashamed and greatly dismay. They shall turn back. They will suddenly be ashamed." Notice the way that he uh, talks or that he writes. That every night I make my bed swim. I dissolve my couch with tears. This is a guy. This is a dude. Have you ever heard a dude talk like this? I never heard a guy in our culture talk like this. It seems that David was very in tune with how he felt at the time. Why? This is something that a girl would write. If I just took off, if I didn't tell you who wrote this, and I walked up to you at random and said, who do you think wrote this? Do you think a guy wrote this or a girl wrote this? More often than not, you probably think, oh, well, probably a girl, hands down. But a guy wrote this. Why? Because again, I believe that David understood that he was a human being that expressed emotion and that expressed grief and sorrow. And he was able to articulate that with this psalm here. So I would say that, again, he is right that using figurative language is a great way to express emotions. But it's not just solely for the girl, though. That when a person says that they've got kicked in the teeth, or they got stabbed in the back, or kicked in the balls, or whatever, that's fine. But they're using expressive figurative language to describe how they feel. There is nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I would say that that is a good way to express how one emotes, and how one feels at the time. So I just thought that I would share that because his example actually underscores something about the nature of human beings, and the biblical perspective highlights that, which is kind of interesting. All right, let's continue.
That's how we talk. We're very physical in nature. The other thing is, if you talk to men about who support each other, right, and they say, if you get dumped, what's the first thing you should do? Hit the gym, baby. And that's where we may assume that this relates to confidence, that if you start working out, you get buff, and you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, I'm so sexy. But we don't even acknowledge for a moment that there may be a physiological aspect to improve your mood. And one of the biggest mistakes that I think we've made in the field of psychotherapy is that we've separated out the mind from the body. Whereas if you look at modern science, we know that anxiety is not just an emotion. It's not just in your mind, that emotions have physical ramifications.
This is a great point that he's making here. And this is where I want to underscore here that I believe that it has been deficient to describe emotions simply as feelings. The two are not the same. Feelings are physiological responses that we experience based upon a particular situation or context that we're in. Emotions, I believe, are a state of being. They involve not just physiological responses that we feel, but they involve our thinking, they impact our mood, they impact our perception. They are influenced by our belief system and our outlook. So emotions don't just involve how one feels, but it's all encompassing. It is all inclusive. It involves not just how one feels, but how one thinks, how one responds too. So when one is happy, I've never seen a person that is happy that's had poor thinking. They usually, how they're thinking and how they perceive things influences how they respond physiologically and what they do. So I think that he is right. I think that we need to take emotions and not make them synonymous with feelings. Within emotions, there are feelings, but emotions are not feelings. They are bigger than that. They're more all-encompassing than that. I call them states of being because I believe that the scriptures underscore them as states of being. For instance, there's one such scripture that says, "Be angry and sin not." It doesn't say feel angry and sin not. It also expresses that you can be angry and not sin, which is kind of interesting. So I believe that anger is a state of being. It's not just feeling angry. It's you are angry. You are, not that you just feel that. I think that's that right there. His statement, the separation between physiology and behaviors. I think ought to be noted. But to also add, I believe that emotions are states of being. That's more accurate than just physiological responses that we feel. Okay, let's continue.
That anxiety can induce diarrhea and change the rate of your peristalsis. Anxiety activates your sympathetic nervous system and reduces blood flow to places like your stomach and increases blood flow to other parts of your body. So we know that emotions are actually very physiological in nature. So why is it as a society that we've kind of gotten on this track of simply talking about them instead of acting physically? And a lot of the men that I've worked with, I've sort of noticed that this physical component is way more important than the talking component, at least compared to the women that I've worked with. Just to give you all a simple example, I find that the men in my office need hugs way more than the women. Now, there are a lot of complications to that. There's a gender dynamic, right, between me and the woman, where maybe the woman doesn't feel as comfortable to hug me. Maybe I don't feel as comfortable to hug the woman. So I'm not saying that that's like a statement of fact. But what I've noticed is that like hugging men, the patients in my office who are dudes, leads to like a lot more emotional healing and sometimes tears and all this kind of stuff and like more dick jokes after we're done, right? So there's something very physical about the way that men deal with their emotion.
Why is it like that? Because men have been taught to feel is bad. Because, within certain contexts, of course, like if a man is being physically intimate with his wife or a girlfriend or whatever, then of course that's permissible. But I'm talking about in light of when one struggles. Men are taught within the culture to feel and to experience touch when one is going through adverse situations is bad. I believe is antithetical to the biblical worldview. That and what he mentions is right, that there are certain contexts where touch may not be, where it may not be permissible. For example, a guy may not want to connect with you in that way or something like that. They might have a predisposition to that. But if you're in counseling and you are working through things and that person, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a hug too, there's physical contact that happens all over the place. For instance, a fist bump, maybe perhaps giving a person a high five or some dap, doing this sort of thing, or maybe even just the shoulder, having a hand on the shoulder, just saying, "Hey, I'm here with you. I know that this is a hard thing." Within a particular context, that could be received well by the guy. But all of us, again, need physical touch of some type, particularly when we're going through adverse situations and problems and struggles and strifes and things like that. All of us need that connection. Why? Because we are human beings that are made in God's image. Again, granted, if the person is comfortable with you connecting and having contact in that way. And so I believe that's the reason why, is that men have been taught that emotions are secondary to rational thought. That's actually not true. Rational thought is a function of the human being, which has been granted by God. Emotions are given to us because we are human beings made in the image of God. And proper information, proper skill leads to proper outcomes. And looking at emotions as not necessarily good nor bad, they are just part of being a human being, a spiritual being really, that feels and experiences these states of being all the time. Right? And I believe that counselors ought to have this connection too, particularly us who are trying to understand this from a biblical perspective, that we are emotional creatures, that women don't have prime real estate on the emotional thoughts. So I think understanding that is important. Okay, let's continue.
And so, if we assume all of this is true, what does this mean for you as a dude? So, I know this sounds kind of weird, but the first thing that I'd recommend is that you actually seek psychotherapy if you're struggling in some way. And that may sound weird because you said, Dr. K, that there's a systemic bias. Yeah, but it's still the best evidence-based treatment that we have for dealing with mental illness. Medication is just as good, by the way. And another thing we need to keep in mind is that there are randomized controlled trials on many types of psychotherapy, which show that they are equally effective for men and women. So it's not like psychotherapy works. It's just that if you're engaging in psychotherapy as a man, there may be a couple of things that we can arm you with.
This is an incredible point. Let me go back to that point that he made, and let me touch on this real quick. This is an incredible point that he's making. Let me rewind this and let's replay it back.
In mind is that there are randomized controlled trials on many types of psychotherapy, which show that they are equally effective for men and women. So it's not like psychotherapy works. It's just that if you're engaged.
That's an amazing point that he just mentioned. Did you catch that? That he says that there are methods and modalities within counseling are equally effective for men and women. So they're around the same. So it doesn't really matter what the model is that is being used in counseling. What's interesting about this particular statement is that it doesn't really matter the model that's being used. What matters is that counseling is effective. Well, I can tell you why it's effective. And the randomized controlled trials, I believe, underscore this. The reason why counseling is effective is because of the relational interaction between the counselor and the counselee. It is the relationship that yields the most benefit within counseling, and that's why counseling is effective. By the way, this is underscored within Scripture, not counseling itself, but the relationship aspect, that there are 20 or so one another's within the Greek Scriptures, that is the New Testament. So love one another, serve one another, bear one another's burdens, thus fulfilling the law of Christ, endure one another, teach one another, instruct one another, give preference to one another in honor. All of these one another's in Scripture underscore the relational aspect between believers. The secret ingredient to counseling is the relational aspect between the counselor and the counselee. If the counselee does not trust me, if I am their counselor and they don't trust me, it does not matter what method I use. It does not matter what techniques I have. It doesn't matter what good wisdom I give or I don't give. All that doesn't matter, because that person does not trust me to give them good counsel. And so that is huge. I tell my students all the time, the glue that makes counseling work is not your techniques. The glue that makes the counseling work is not your model. The glue that makes counseling work is the trust of the counselee to the counselor, and helping them work through and process their presenting problem. That is the secret sauce. If your counselee trusts you, then more often than not, they will be impacted by that counseling that you give them. Amazing. That is an amazing statement, an amazing fact from observing interactions with human beings. And this goes right back to, by the way, the episode prior, that research observes not just acknowledging God's glory and his handiwork and how he created things, but it's for the relief of man's estate. This research underscores the fact that we are relational creatures by design, and that when we relate to people and they give us good sound counsel and good advice and we connect with them, that they more than likely will not only have a great experience, but counseling will be effective for them. Amazing. Okay, let's continue.
Engaging in psychotherapy as a man, there may be a couple of things that we can arm you with to really make that psychotherapy really worthwhile. So the first recommendation that I have is that you see at least 3 psychotherapists, or at least you see at least 3 before you give up on therapy. If you love the first one, then stick with them. And so a lot of psychotherapy is about fit, and it may just be hard to find someone who's able to communicate with you in a way that is helpful. So, a couple of things that I would recommend, some language that you can use if you go to psychotherapy. So, the first is just simply let your therapist know, hey, I'm not really aware of what I feel all the time, and I'm not very good at articulating my feelings. Because oftentimes therapists will say, how do you feel? And as dudes, we don't know how to answer that. So, just be transparent with them at the beginning. Another thing that I'd
That's great. That's great counsel. That's great counsel. But in order for them to share that, they have to be in tune with how they feel about their counselor. You can't get around that. Again, for guys, I would say not just finding 3 therapists or 3 psychotherapists, but also finding 3 psychotherapists or 3 counselors and staying with them for at least 4 to 5 sessions. Because if you're a guy and you have not been able to express your emotions right away, it's going to take a little bit. It's going to take some time to really get into that mode and to really begin to start to think in that way. So I would add to his tip that try 3 psychotherapists or 3 counselors. If you like the one that you like, stay with the one that you like, as he mentioned. But if before you give up, not only go see 3, but also I'd say, try it for about a month to 2 months, maybe 4 to 6 sessions at least, because it takes a little while for the wheels to get moving. Right? Because the person has to know you. You got to see whether or not you guys jive together, if you guys connect with one another. So not just seeing 3, but also staying with them for about 4 to 6 sessions before you move on to the next one. So yeah, let's continue.
recommend is that y'all check out this idea of normative male alexithymia, which is this idea that men are, by default, it's normative. So it's like most men are colorblind to their internal emotional state. So check out our video on alexithymia if y'all want to. And then you can even tell your therapist that, hey, I'm concerned that I'm a little bit alexithymic. So you're signaling to them that you may not be able to participate in therapy in a default way. The next thing that you can do is ask your therapist.
I would also encourage the person to not to use alexithymia with a counselor or something like that, because they may not know that. Even though they are a counselor, they may not be aware of that. Just, take the concept and just say, hey, I'm not really in tune with my feelings or my emotions. It's kind of a different language for me. Could you maybe perhaps help me kind of understand why that is and, help build that? Because they might not know what that is. Don't assume that just because they're a counselor, they know exactly. Now he knows what that is. He knows exactly what that is. But the person might go, alexithymia, I don't know what that means. So if you're a guy and if you're a guy in counseling and you take that particular word and use it, be sure also to describe what that is too, because not all counselors are familiar with that term.
Therapist to change their style a little bit if it isn't working for you. So you can tell them, hey, I've noticed that you're really quiet. And then you kind of ask these questions like, how do you feel, over and over and over again? And then I keep answering, I don't know. Can you try to be a little bit more active or offer a little bit more guidance instead of being quieter and asking only open-ended questions? Can you help me understand stuff or guide me in some way? And some therapists may feel really uncomfortable with that. They may turn that around into a question. Why do you feel like you need more guidance?
By the way, a very in tuned counselor will style flex. This is also understood in scripture as well. Some people need to be admonished and instructed. Some people need to be encouraged and strengthened. Some people need physical assistance and help. And based upon the context and things like that, they'll be able to flex in and out. And be able to try different things and techniques. Remember, counseling is a practice. It's a practice. Biblical counseling or counseling from a biblical perspective is a practice. And so trying different approaches, trying different exercises, trying different interventions, asking different questions, observing different things. Those things come with the territory, and learning how to, counseling should be very, very organic. It should be very organic in how one approaches these things. So, by the way, just as an aside too, another way that you can see that a counselor is really in tune is that they draft a treatment plan for you and walk through that treatment plan. Observing the presenting problem, laying out the short-term and long-term goals for counseling, and even some of the interventions that might be used within the sessions itself. They may not be able to outline every single intervention that's going to be used in every single session, but they're able to outline some of the main interventions that are going to be used and maybe revisited to help address those presenting problems that you might have within the counseling session. So an in-tune counselor will also do that too. They'll have a treatment plan prepared, or something that help outline the trajectory of counseling as well. And that way, that can, by the way, that helps actually build trust too as well, because then the counselee doesn't feel like they're being freewheeled by the counselor as well. And we don't counsel for our sake. We counsel for the sake of the person that is across from us or in front of us, that it is about them and what they need to help them grow and develop and learn. By the way, this also underscores that we as biblical counselors, or counselors working from a biblical perspective, need to be accurate in our understanding of Scripture, because to be inaccurate in our understanding of Scripture is not to help them. To be unclear, using scriptures out of context when that context does not yield the point that we're making. Actually, when we do that, we're making it about us, even though we're applying that information to them. And so we need to be very, very careful that we are giving them good information, proper information that will help them in all aspects, not just in the aspects of the studies and the research and the design and the interventions and the models and all that, but also to the biblical side, as we give them understanding concerning that God desires that they have a perspective that aligns with reality as He's created it. It's not about us; it's about them and their presenting problems, and we ought to address that in whatever context that they need. It's a great video. Great video. And I would underscore and highlight some of the points that he made. We are human beings that express emotion in many different ways, and that there is an inappropriate way to express emotion, particularly when we have poor information and we have a low skill set. We don't know how to express it, and so we will respond in the way that we have been taught or that we have learned, or things like that. And so we need to replace that with good information and good skill. Second of all, I like the fact of what he said, that these things are learned, they are taught, which means they can be unlearned and untaught and relearned and retaught. That being emotional is not a genetic thing, but that it is a human being thing. And when we understand that and work with that, that we can see emotions more clearly and better than we did previously. And that talk therapy and stuff like that is the gold standard, but I think it's been impacted by some of the therapies that are some of the models that have come before us. There's really nothing new under the sun. It's just kind of rehashed and repackaged. And so I would say that in this context, that talk therapy has been impacted by a little bit of psychoanalytic, lots of person-centered, and just a sprinkle of feminist therapy mixed in there. But I think person-centered has largely impacted how talk therapy is today and stuff like that. Overall, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a totally sucky video and 5 being just pristine and excellent, I give it about a 4. Again, one of the things that makes it a 4 is because of the nuances that I was kind of adding as he was talking. But this is a great video, and I think he gives really, really good tips and that align with the scriptures, that underscore the biblical worldview, that exposes and expresses that we are relational creatures, that we interact on very meaningful and impactful ways. And I found it to be very, very interesting that it doesn't matter the model that's used. What makes counseling effective is the relationship that one has with their counselor. So I think that is worth its weight in gold right there. So shout out to Healthy Gamer GG. Again, I really appreciate just some of the videos that he has out there with really, really good shorts as well as good videos. And you can check him out on YouTube. Like I said, I'll leave a link for this particular episode in the comments below, and you could check out all of his stuff and all of his resources and everything else like that. And so again, that's a great thing. Okay, maybe you have a particular take or something that you would like to add to this discussion. This has been a long one. This is a long episode, man. I didn't mean it to be this long, but I felt like in order to give it a really good analysis that I really needed to kind of dig in deep into the weeds. So I apologize for the length, but you can always stop and start it if you wanted to come back, or hopefully it's been compelling to you that you just hear it all the way through. Maybe you can do that on a road trip or something on the way on vacation over the summer. I don't know. But if you have any comments or anything else that you would like to add on this episode or any previous episodes of the Renewed Mind podcast, you can do so by reaching us in the following places. You can reach us by email at therenewedmindpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word, therenewedmindpodcast@gmail.com. You can reach us on X at The Renewed Mind. That is at The Renewed Mind, all one word. You can also reach us on Facebook at The Renewed Mind. That is THERE-NYOO-ED Mind on Facebook. Or you can reach us on Instagram, TikTok, or Lord's Book, which is kind of a derivative to Facebook, at The Renewed Mind Podcast, all one word. That is at The Renewed Mind Podcast, all one word. Again, this podcast seeks to share and really try to bring out and flesh out the biblical perspective in counseling and psychology, analyzing videos and articles and things like that. And we try to do that to give those who are counselors and want to have a little bit or deeper understanding of the scriptures and how it connects and harmonizes with counseling and psychology so that they could be effective in their approach. We also want to give counselees information on how to look for a counselor that has a biblical perspective that aligns with their practice. So we're kind of doing a couple of things here. If you could do us a favor, if you like this or find this to be helpful, or maybe even think that someone might think that this is helpful for them, please like, share. You can comment, of course, and subscribe. I've got more titles, more subjects in the pipe, and I'm looking to increase the longevity of this program here. So if you can give us a like and a follow or a share, you can comment again, and we'll read it on the podcast as well, and I'll comment on it and respond to it, and that would be a great thing. Again, thank you so much for listening. For all the new individuals that are listening to this podcast, thank you again so much for tuning in, and I hope that I have earned your patronage and your support. And for those who have been with us since the beginning, thank you so much for continuing to listen and respond as well. And I look forward to the next podcast. All right. Well, my name is Dr. Luther Smith, and you have been watching the Renewed Mind podcast. Thank you very much. Grace and peace to you, and I will catch you on the next episode. Okay. Bye-bye.